I'm here today to tell you a little bit about what I do for a living, and I hope you like it. I'm a curator at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, next door, but most of what I do is paleontological field and laboratory research in an attempt to address one profound question, a question that each of you may have in mind, very simple to spell out, but extremely difficult to answer. Where did we come from? I've been trying to address this question for the last 20 years by going to very remote, sometimes hostile, area in Eastern Africa in search of fossils that are, at least for us paleoanthropologists, our only clues to address the question of where we came from. Now, this area, this remote area that I'm talking about, is located in Ethiopia, which is right here. And the Afar Desert has been there for many, many years. It's a desert now, but millions of years ago, this place was very lush, green, a lot of water, and a lot of life. And that's why these early human ancestors used to live there as far as 6 million years ago. Now, you might wonder, why this place? Why don't we find fossils of our early human ancestors in Ohio Valley? Or why not in Death Valley in California? Well, unfortunately, they're not there. They were never there at this time. But this place, this Afar Desert of Ethiopia, owes all its paleoanthropological fame to one geological phenomenon known as plate tectonics. Now, the Earth that we live on sits on what we call plates. And these plates are not still, they move. They move in different directions. And there are 3 plates in the Eastern African region, like here, that are drifting apart from each other. Of course, some of these plates also collide against each other and create mountains. But at this specific place, these 3 plates, the Ethiopian plate, the Somali plate, and the Arabian plate, have been pulling apart from each other at least for the last 10 million years. Now, while they pull apart from each other, they're creating this huge crack, which runs all the way from Lebanon in the north, all the way down to Mozambique. You can follow the rift all the way down to almost South Africa. And while it opens, what it's doing is it's exposing these long buried deposits with some signature of life from millions of years ago. And erosion plays its part, exposing these signatures of past life in the form of fossils. That's what we go look for in this part of the world. And of course, what you see here on the lower part is what's called the Afar triple junction, because there are 3 different plates in this region. And this is where we go all the time. I go to Ethiopia every year. Not only because I have living relatives who live there, but it happens that all the long dead relatives of mine are also there. What a coincidence, right? At least for me, because whenever I go, I happen to see both, right? So here are most of the sites deep in the Afar Desert, and this is where we go every year looking for fossils of our ancient ancestors. Now, this is what it looks like today, and earlier I mentioned this place used to be a totally different place millions of years ago. Now, you might wonder, how the hell did you guys find out about this place, that it has a lot of fossil remains of our human ancestors? Well, we would give the credit to some guy, which I'll show you in a bit, who was not even a paleontologist, but a geologist, who happened to find the famous site of Hadar, where the famous Lucy was found. But this is just to show you how many paleontological projects are currently working in this part of the world, regardless of its remoteness, regardless of the fact that it's actually malaria infested. Okay, a lot of people die from malaria in this region, but we still take the risk because it's worth it. So here we have a number of projects that I wanted to show you here. Middle Awash project, a very big project that has been finding a lot of early human fossil remains. Dikika is another project. Gona, where the earliest stone tools have been found. Here we have another site called the Ligararu, and Ronas Emilia is the site that I work at. So I've been working at this site for the last 8 years. But going back to the history of how we found out that this place is really important, you will see that we've been able to find, this is just to show you how many early hominid species that we know so far. There are about 20 of them. And out of these, there are about 9 of them that have been found from the Afar region of Ethiopia. So it's very rich in terms of the yield that we have from this area. So here are the pioneers. Now, we call them the pioneers because, first of all, the guy who got there first is this guy here, Maurice Taib. He's a French geologist and a student of geology who was working on the history, the geological history of the Awash River, which is a river that goes south to the north across all the sites that we work in. And as he was transecting along the Awash River is when he ran into these fossils at Hadar. And of course, he invited the then graduate student, Don Johansen, who is shown here. Of course, they don't look like this now. They've changed so much. And this is, I mean, they're even older than this. This is from 6 years ago. But these are the guys who initially went to Hadar in 1972, 1973, and found what was then called the famous knee joint, which is this one here, which indicated that walking on 2 legs was very ancient. Because at that time, all the evidence we had was from South Africa. And the oldest evidence of walking on 2 legs was about 2 million years old. But this was like 3.2 million years old. So it was a very exciting discovery at that moment. In 1974, when they went back to the site, they found the famous Lucy. And this is when what's called the Afar Bountiful Legacy started. And since then, as I said earlier, there have been so many projects which have been going back and forth to not only Hadar, but also the areas in the vicinity and finding more fossils. So just to give you an idea of how, in these days, we try to find new sites where we can actually find fossil hominids, we do it very differently. In the old days, it's either by accident or some explorers go there and see some fossils, they report it, and then paleontologists go and find more fossils. But since the 1980s, because of the development in technology, we started using aerial photographs, satellite imageries, and we tried to interpret those to see if we can actually locate good places where we can find fossils. And that's what we did with my project. We started with a huge survey and exploration of about 5,000 square miles of an area north of Hadar, which is shown here. And we eventually settled in a small area out of all that, which we now call Ronas Emilia, and show you satellite imagery of that area. This is what it looks like. And most of what you see here are volcanics. They're rocks that you don't find in these volcanic rocks, you don't find any fossils. So we have to look for sediments, which are shown here as white areas. And these spots here are the initial places that we went and checked and seeing that there were fossils in these areas. But we eventually settled in one specific area, which is shown here in the yellow rectangle. And we've been conducting field research in this specific area for the last 8 years. And so far, we've been able to collect so many fossils from this area. About 6,000 fossil specimens so far, with about 45 mammalian taxa identified. These are all 3.6 to 3.8 million years old, okay? And we have about 150 fossil specimens of early human ancestors. This is just the beginning. We're still continuing the work, and that's why in my title I said this is an incessant affair, because it never stops. So we have so many new taxa, so many new species that we never knew about, And we also find our earliest ancestors, as you see here. Now, I can talk about each of these specimens for like hours, but the time I have, I think, is 5 minutes. So what I'll do is, for brevity's sake, I'll just give you an idea of how we do our work, from finding a site all the way to publication and communicating our results with the general public. So here is how we get to the sites. Now, there are no roads, so we have to make up our own roads in four-wheel drive cars. In some cases, we risk our lives and our cars trying to cross rivers like what you see here. And sometimes we don't risk our cars, but we risk our lives, and we try to cross the river on foot like what you see here. Okay, this is how we get to the sites. And then we do survey and exploration. Usually this takes a number of hours of walking around, okay? Because we don't know where we're gonna find these fossils. So we have to walk for hours, sometimes days, to get into a targeted area. And then when we get to a specific area, we start looking for fossils. Now, whenever I come back from the field, people say, how was the dig? Well, we were not digging, we were just, wandering around with our eyes on the ground and looking for fossils. Because digging is something that we probably do like 1% of the time. You have to have good reason to excavate. Otherwise, you collect what you find on the surface. And that's how we collect most of these 6,000 specimens that I indicated earlier. And when we find good discoveries, like remains of our ancestors, we don't find them intact. We find them in bits and pieces, like what you see here. This is a fragment of a jaw, the lower jaw. There is another fragment right here, and there is another one here. And you can't see this one, but there is also another one here. Now that tells you that this jaw has been out there, fragmented into who knows however many pieces. So we can't really pick whatever we saw on the ground and move on. We have to try to find more of this specimen. So that's when we decide to do what's called crawling. We get our, on the ground with our hands and knees, and we try to find more pieces. And it goes on beyond this. If you're lucky and if you see any indications of some specimens coming out of the ground, that's when you start excavating. That's the only time you do excavation, and excavation could sometimes take days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, or years. And I'll give you a good example on that one. And then we have to sift all the dirt around the initial discovery. Sifting can be done either dry, like what you see here, or in some cases, we do what's called wet sieving. Because sometimes rocks and bones can look alike, and when we wash it, they differentiate in terms of their color. So after all this, we have to, of course, pick all the sieved material, like small pans, slowly, picking grain by grain, and that's how we recover all the fragments of what we find. So all these major discoveries that you see in our field have gone through this process in one way or another. And I just wanted to give you one example, which is related to Ardi, the discovery of Ardi. Now, in 1994, I found the first piece, which was just a tiny bit of a handball. Now, that was not it. We had to excavate the site for 3 years. And after 3 years of excavation, this is what we had. Most of these specimens were so fragile that we couldn't even pick them up. So we had to plaster jacket them like a broken leg with all the metrics around them and bring them back to the lab and clean them in the lab to free them so that we can study them. And guess how many years it took to just prepare this into something that we can study like this? 6 years. 3 years of excavation, 6 years of cleaning and preparation, and of course about 5 years of analysis. So it took 14 years from discovery to publication. Nothing to complain about that, because you haven't seen the specimen. So eventually when we publish it in international recognized scientific journals such as Nature and Science. And obviously this gets shared with our colleagues and with the general public. And of course the popular media picks them up, and they're usually cover stories, front page stories, and so forth. That tells you something. Humans by nature are really interested to know where we came from. And every news that comes out from what we do is very exciting and really interesting. And that's why you see them in major popular magazines like this. We had a recent discovery 3 weeks ago. We published a paper in Nature of a partial foot. Now, this partial foot was so interesting to people that it made it to a lot of news media, including our own Plain Dealer. It was a cover story on, a front page story on the Plain Dealer, and it was also a front page story on New York Times. Now, that also tells you how much people expect to hear what we have to say about these new discoveries. And that's why I think this is an incessant affair. We keep continuing finding surprises from what we do, and people always are anxious to find out what we're doing in this area of study. But of course, in order to keep this legacy continuing, as educators, we have a responsibility to make sure that there is a next generation of paleoanthropologists. There is a next generation of the maker class. So we have to train our students both here and abroad so that they follow our footsteps and become good paleoanthropologists or whatever they want to become. So finally, I just want to leave you with this thank you slide, which is from the Afar. And this tells you a lot about how the Afar people live today. What you see in this region are cows, goats, sheep, AK-47s, and fossils. Thank you.